For all those people who push back against the COVID-19 mandates, question the government narrative, supported the Freedom Convoy, or just knew in their gut that something wasn't right, this video is for you. The White House just released a 557-page report to the public. It exposes a sordid tale of lies, corruption, and catastrophic failures that fueled the COVID-19 pandemic's devastation. This isn't a mere catalog of mistakes. It's a damning expose of a government that manipulated science, funded reckless gain-of-function research, lied to cover their tracks, obstructed justice, and imposed baseless policies that shattered lives and communities. From Fauci's deadly cover-up to Biden's orchestrated narrative, this report reveals a web of deceit that betrayed millions, if not billions, of people around the world. The saga starts with deliberate deception, the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. This paper was published in Nature Medicine on March 17, 2020, which became the cornerstone for dismissing the lab leak theory. The report reveals that this wasn't science. It was a calculated move by Dr. Anthony Fauci to protect a narrative that not only shielded China, but preserved their risky gain-of-function research. On January 31, 2020, virologist Dr. Christian Andersen alerted Fauci to signs that COVID-19 may have originated from a lab. Instead of investigating, Fauci pushed for a peer-reviewed paper to counter it. By February 1st, a conference call with Fauci, NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins, and Dr. Jeremy Farrar produced a draft by 7:40 p.m. that day, a rush job to kill all speculation. Emails from Dr. Andersen on February 8th and 20th in 2020 exposed the motive: to disprove the lab leak, defend China, and avoid stricter biosafety rules. When Nature rejected the paper for fueling conspiracy theories, it landed in Nature Medicine after a few quick edits. And then Fauci cited it at a White House briefing on April 17, 2020. Cover-up complete. However, this paper wasn't a pursuit of truth. It was a weapon to silence dissent, manipulate public perception, and protect powerful interests. The government didn't just mislead, it orchestrated a scientific fraud that shaped the pandemic's narrative for years. Perhaps the most damning revelation in the report confirms what many suspected all along and what Anthony Fauci was trying so hard to cover up. COVID-19 originated from a lab leak tied to gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was funded by NIH grants through the EcoHealth Alliance. FBI, CIA, and DOE assessments point to a lab leak citing sick Wuhan researchers in autumn of 2019 and no zoonotic evidence. Adding fuel to the fire, a 2018 proposal called Defuse was pitched by EcoHealth. It was rejected by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. And what was Defuse? A plan to engineer COVID-like viruses. DARPA said no because they felt these experiments were too dangerous, so Fauci turned to China. Then, through proxies and multiple cover-ups, the government circumvented its own guardrails and funded this reckless gamble with taxpayer dollars, unleashing a pandemic that killed millions. Now, Fauci is clearly public enemy number one, but he didn't act alone. Dr. Peter Daszak, head of EcoHealth Alliance, has emerged as a central villain in this scandal. It was Daszak who funneled NIH funds to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for gain-of-function research. EcoHealth's Year 5 progress report, due in September 2019 but quietly submitted in August of 2021, revealed unreported experiments that should have triggered immediate alarm. When the NIH demanded lab notebooks, Daszak lied to protect his funding. He instructed staff to delay document production, doctored public disclosures, and even claimed diplomatic immunity to evade accountability. His false statements to Congress likely violated federal law, prompting a DOJ grand jury investigation and subpoenas for all communications with the Wuhan lab. So, this wasn't some bureaucratic slip-up. It was a calculated effort to hide the truth. Daszak used taxpayer money to bankroll reckless experiments that helped spark a global crisis. Now, before we let the National Institutes of Health off the hook, you might be wondering how this so-called funding oversight was ever allowed to happen. According to the report, the NIH fostered a culture of evasion and negligence exemplified by Dr. David Morenz, Fauci's senior advisor. Dr. Morenz is a linchpin in this scandal who deliberately obstructed the investigation. Morenz deleted federal records and shared sensitive information with Peter Daszak so EcoHealth could continue funding Wuhan. So now the dots are starting to connect. What Morenz did wasn't just unethical, it was a stunning betrayal. By destroying records and leaking privileged information, he not only undermined the public, he actively shielded those responsible for high-risk gain-of-function research. His apparent perjury before Congress only deepens the scandal, exposing a man who chose loyalty to his colleagues over his duty to the nation. As you already know by this point, Dr. Morenz was not a lone bad actor. He was a symptom of a rotten system that prioritized self-preservation over truth. That brings us to the Biden administration's Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS. The United States Department of Health and Human Services is a cabinet-level executive branch department of the U.S. federal government created to protect the health of the U.S. people and provide essential human services. Its motto is, improving the health, safety, and well-being of America. They are the proverbial head of the snake for all health-related matters in America, and they are directly responsible for the NIH. Now, according to this COVID report, the HHS engaged in a multi-year campaign of delay, confusion, and non-responsiveness aimed at obstructing the Select Subcommittee's investigation into the pandemic. Instead of cooperating, HHS deliberately crippled its own oversight response team, stalling document production and burying evidence that could implicate senior officials like Fauci. This wasn't incompetence, it was a calculated move to protect the powerful and evade accountability. The report outlines how HHS dragged its feet for years, delivering incomplete, heavily redacted, or entirely missing records in an apparent attempt to frustrate investigators. This stonewalling helped protect a carefully crafted narrative that downplayed the government's failures and kept the public in the dark about the true origins and mishandling of the pandemic. It should also be noted that Biden gave Fauci a full pardon for all of his actions during the pandemic, and now that his actions are out in the open, it's significantly more damning. As we continue to climb our way up the ladder, we land on the World Health Organization. According to the report, the WHO emerges as a global accomplice, caving to pressure by the Chinese Communist Party and failing the entire world. Despite 10,000 cases and over 1,000 deaths across 19 countries, the WHO delayed declaring a public health emergency until January 30th, 2020, wasting a full month. It ignored Taiwan's December 31st, 2019 warning about human-to-human transmission, instead parroting Beijing's denials. Then in March 2021, the WHO released a whitewashed origins report that dismissed the lab leak theory, once again bowing to China's narrative. Now, with its proposed pandemic treaty, the WHO is threatening the sovereignty of countries like the US and Canada by trying to bind them to CCP-backed policies in future health emergencies. By aligning with a regime that silenced whistleblowers and suppressed early warnings, the WHO helped enable the unchecked spread of a global catastrophe. This is a betrayal of global health, and this organization should be abolished. Now, let's talk about the science. Unfortunately, it's mostly political science because none of these mandates were based on objective facts. The 6 feet apart social distancing rule, which shuttered schools and businesses, was a baseless edict. Fauci admitted it sort of just appeared and that it was an empiric decision with no scientific grounding. This arbitrary mandate disrupted education, crippled small businesses, and fueled public distrust, revealing a government more interested in control than credibility. And the fallout was profound. Children lost critical learning years, businesses collapsed, and communities were fractured. This wasn't a good faith error, it was a reckless power grab that left millions struggling to recover. Next up, mask mandates. Masks were sold as a silver bullet solution, but also lacked evidence. The Cochrane Review in January of 2023 concluded that masks probably make little to no difference. The CDC's reliance on flawed studies, like one involving Missouri hairstylists, fueled a flip-flopping narrative that tanked its trust from 69% in 2020 to 44% by March 2022. For children, masks cause developmental harm, with 84% of speech pathologists reporting emotional and behavioral issues and 79% noting delayed language disorders. The government didn't just misjudge, it misled the public, imposing mandates that harmed children and eroded trust. This wasn't science, it was a masquerade forcing compliance while ignoring the human cost. Then came the lockdowns, the government's most destructive lie, causing economic ruin and psychological devastation. Mental health disorders surged by 22%. Youth suicides hit an all-time high, and adolescent overdose deaths soared 109%. Babies born during the pandemic scored nearly 25% lower cognitively, while 52% of young adults live with parents, rivaling symptoms of the Great Depression. Lockdowns weren't a necessary evil, they were a catastrophic overreach. The government ignored evidence that targeted protections could have spared the young and healthy. Instead, its blanket approach crushed livelihoods, fractured families, and left permanent scars, all while failing to justify its necessity. This policy was punishment, not protection. And despite all these harmful policies, the government's misinformation campaign was still its most sinister act. Public health officials demonized alternative treatments and the lab leak theory, colluding with social media giants to censor all COVID dissent. The Biden administration's outright censorship coerced compliance, stifling debate and eroding trust. This wasn't about protecting public health. It was about controlling the narrative, a chilling assault on free speech and autonomy. By suppressing valid questions and punishing skeptics, the government alienated millions, fueling distrust that persists today. According to the report, this wasn't a misstep. It was a deliberate effort to manipulate society, leaving the public voiceless and betrayed in a crisis that demanded transparency. This story begins with Fauci's fabricated proximal origin paper, a lie to protect powerful interests. It escalates through EcoHealth's reckless gain-of-function research, funded by a complicit NIH and shielded by Biden's HHS. Morenz's record deletions deepen the betrayal, while the WHO's CCP allegiance globalizes the failure. Arbitrary social distancing, baseless mask mandates, and devastating lockdowns reveal a government unmoored from science, culminating in a censorship campaign that silenced the truth. The government didn't just fail. It orchestrated a betrayal that cost lives, trust, and hope. The White House's blistering 557-page expose is more than an American reckoning. It's a rallying cry for Canada to confront its own pandemic failures. North of the border, we endured the same authoritarian overreach. Endless lockdowns, vaccine coercion, vaccine passports, mask mandates, an illegally used Emergency Measures Act, frozen bank accounts, and full-blown censorship, all justified with shaky science and enforced with an iron fist. Canada's leaders must face scrutiny for their decisions. The economic devastation of extended closures, the mental health toll on our youth, and the erosion of trust from censorship and media manipulation. The White House report shows what's possible when courage meets accountability, a thorough, unsparing investigation that lays bare the truth. Canadians deserve no less. Let this report inspire a national inquiry, one that probes every decision, exposes every deception, and holds every official accountable. If the US can confront its betrayals, so must Canada, ensuring that never again do we let a government sacrifice our freedoms and futures on the altar of their power.